By the 1960s, a small but growing number of parents and teachers were complaining about conditions in the schools.
Here I was, a brand new teacher, coming into my first teaching experience, and I walked into this old building built in 1842, named after a wonderful New England writer, Louisa May Alcott, and I had 42 students, 36 seats. We didn't have new crayons. We had a box of old nubbly crayons. Pencils had to be collected at the end of the day so you would have enough for the children for the next day. There wasn't enough white paper.
Books were often in short supply and sometimes contained lessons that damaged.
And here was this book I found, which had, it had the word niggers in it, 10 little niggers sitting on a fence, 9 little niggers playing in a line, and it was just like 10 little Indians, 9 little Indians, and it was very offensive.
Many of the Negro parents believe that a predominantly Negro school is inferior per se, but we here in Boston do not believe that premise.
Louise Day Hicks said that the schools were fine the way they were. The city's top vote-getter in the mid-60s, Hicks chaired the Boston School Committee. In 1965, 1 in 4 students was black. Only 1 in 200 teachers was black, and there was not one black principal. The NAACP brought parents' concerns to the school committee.
We just wanted them to say, yes, there's segregation in the schools, and we wanted them to acknowledge that the problem exists and to commit themselves to do something about it.
I feel that at this time, any school that is predominantly Negro is an inadequate school.
I didn't hear what you said, Mrs. Johnson.
I said that any school that is predominantly Negro in Boston is an inadequate school.
But Mrs. Johnson, the superintendent of schools, has stated as his policy that a racially imbalanced school is not educationally harmful.
Well, Mrs. Hicks, Madam Chairman, may I say this? Superintendent Orenberger and yourself and other committee members do not have children in a racially imbalanced school, so you do not know what the effect is on our children.
The statement that we made to the school committee said that where there were a majority of black students, there was not concern for how these kids learned, that there were crowded classrooms, temporary teachers, not enough books, and supplies were low and all of that kind of thing. Even physical conditions were poor.
Community activists could not force the school committee to acknowledge a problem.
So all that brains, I think it just needs some goodwill and some common sense.
Parents responded with a variety of strategies throughout the mid-60s. They organized one-day school boycotts in freedom schools, but short-term protest was not enough. They ran candidates for the school committee, but they lost. They pushed through a state law outlawing racially imbalanced schools, but the school committee refused to enforce it. Not yet 15% of the city, blacks were a minority too small to strongly influence elections or elected officials. So parents took matters into their own hands. Some set up voluntary programs that moved children to empty seats in white schools.
We decided that where there were a large number of white students, that's where the care went, that's where the books went, that's where the money went. So therefore, our theory was move our kids into that school where they're putting all of the resources so that they can get a better education.
Kujichagulia means self-determination.
Other parents took a different approach. Instead of working to integrate white schools, they established their own parent-run independent schools.
Does anybody have any questions? No. Go to work.
Parents saw that public education was not offering young people not only the strong education that they needed, but the social relationships, a recognition of who they were as African Americans just was not happening in the Boston public school system. So there was a real move community-wide to develop institutions that would meet both of those needs.
The black community could not afford to transport all its students to white schools, nor to run its own school system. The battle for quality education would have to be fought in the public schools. That struggle had been going on for a decade. Black parents were not going to give up. The school committee was not going to give in, and most other city leaders did not want to get involved.
I think it's not unfair to say that the business community, the financial community, and I would say the religious community took a walk in the early 1970s, leaving really only the politicians and the parents as the people who cared about the issue. And in a certain sense, the parents got pitted against one another, white neighborhoods against black neighborhoods, in a way that no one had ever bargained for.
In 1972, under NAACP leadership, black parents filed a class action suit against the school committee in federal district court. A confrontation was looming that would change the city in ways never expected.
We filed a lawsuit in the federal court because there was no other place for us to go. It was literally the court of last resort.
Here we go, Boston! Here we go! Come on!
In a city where neighborhoods were divided by race, desegregating the schools would mean busing children from one neighborhood to another.
I wouldn't care if they were green or purple. It's the idea of putting my kid on a bus when I have a school right across the street from where they should go. I don't care what color they are.
On June 21, 1974, Federal District Court Judge W. Arthur Garrity ruled that the Boston School Committee was guilty of consciously maintaining two separate school systems, one black, one white. He ordered an immediate remedy, citywide busing, to start in September. Less than a mile separated two of Boston's poorer neighborhoods. Roxbury was the heart of the black community. South Boston was Louise Day Hicks' home and a center of white resistance. Students were to be bused between the two neighborhoods.
When Garrity's decision came down in June of 1974, we were sunk when we heard some of the remedies, the one of busing to South Boston, because those of us who had lived in Boston all of our lives knew that this was going to be a very, very difficult thing to pull off.
With the opening of school only 12 weeks away, political differences among blacks gave way to shared concern for the safety of the children. Freedom House, a Roxbury community center, coordinated black preparations for busing.
One of the objectives during that period over the summer was to assure that there would be a peaceful transition and that we would commit ourselves to do that.
We stand united at this critical time to provide leadership and resource to the parents and children who are residents in our community and those children with their parents who will be attending public schools in this community. We call on other sections in the city to assume the same kind of responsibilities that we are assuming.
Boston is a very hidebound, distrustful, turf-conscious, class-conscious, parochial city full of people who did not make much progress over the years. I'm talking about white folks. They were not middle-income people. They were poor folk, and they were running hardscrabble operations. And they were scared folk. By the time busing came around, these people were ripe for revolution.
It's tearing them apart. People, as a community, it's tearing them apart. They may say this is helping, it's tearing them apart. I'm not for this, I don't care, my one will not go to school, but it's tearing them apart.
Well, I'm the mayor, and the first recognition is that it's a court order that has to be enforced by the city, that it's a final decision, that it's irrevocable, and that I'm going to be responsible at a minimum for public safety, and at a maximum for the social health. In a way, it's a little exaggerated, but the morals of the town. It's a moral question, as well as a political question. What I did was respond politically.
I felt that
in a series of coffee hours set up in homes throughout the city, the mayor met with white parents opposed to busing.
All right, but it's not behind us yet. It'll be a painful process going through it because the South didn't just slide through it. It tore them apart as it will help to tear us apart.
The mood was one of confusion, concern, and fear because the elected officials during that summer of 1974, after the order had been given by Judge Garrity, were very often making statements that this would not happen.
Now, how can we beat the federal court? By getting some strong anti-busing legislation from Washington. So I suggest to you, if we're going to win, if you're going to keep your children in their neighborhood schools, that you join with the rest of the city on September the 9th in a grand march before the federal building.
Just because I'm white doesn't mean that the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to me either. I am white and I want my rights.
Demonstrators had come to the federal building to protest Senator Edward Kennedy's support of desegregation. His family had always been the pride of Boston's Irish community, but now the crowd turned on Kennedy.
Those people out there don't care to listen to you. Well, that's fine.
They're taking my kids from them! Gonna put us out of the town of the country!
The crowd pursued Kennedy to the doors of the federal building. School was due to start in 3 days. September 12, 1974. Under court order, against school committee wishes, the integration of Boston schools began.
Are you in this class? Hey, in room 202? I
It was a quiet first day of school in Roxbury, as it was in most of the city. A committee of black parents waited inside to greet the few white students who came to Roxbury High School. But across town, crowds of whites had been gathering outside South Boston High School since early morning.
Gentlemen, let's go. Come on, go to school or go home. Come on, La Rosa, let's go.
The school's headmaster had been at South Boston High for 9 years.
Let's go, gentlemen. Come on, get in.
You can tell us to leave, then we can tell kids not to go to school.
Come on, let's go. Go to school or go home. Come on, Brian. Let's go. Go to school or go home. Let's go. Hey, when you leave, let's go.
Inside, things were quiet, with most white students absent. At the end of the school day, more trouble waited outside. On the evening news, Bostonians saw school buses being attacked as they left South Boston.
Eggs at the window and try to hit people with them, and they was calling us black niggas.
I want to say that my little boy got back safe, but the only reason, I don't think why they should bust these smaller kids across there and get all hurt up when they can't defend themselves. I feel like they should go over here to this school over here in Denver. Instead of busting them way across there, they can't defend themselves, they can't fight, they can't do nothing.
Racial violence in the city known as the Cradle of Liberty made headlines across the country and around the world. The black community was apprehensive, but hopeful.
Every day, yesterday the first day, every day go by, there's going to be more improvement about it. You know, like yesterday the first day, today the second, you have more improvement today than you had yesterday.
Gotta be.
Yeah, you know, and it's going to continue that way till they get better, but it's going to take a while. You can't do it all in one day.
They're not going until they get some black cops and some black drivers. They did not pick my kid up at school. Left her over there.
Left her in South Boston?
Left her in South Boston. No, they left over there. All those people out there are Irish. They left her out there. And they refused to go get her.
Whites staged a citywide school boycott, a tactic borrowed from the civil rights movement. At the boycott's peak, more than 50% of all white students stayed home.
Well, the boycott was that if there were no children in school, they couldn't implement the plan. So we decided to, and it came from another being. It came from the Freedom Schools in Roxbury in the 60s. We had a community meeting, asked the parents, explained what we thought, and asked the parents if they would go along with the boycott. The majority of people did.
I did not support the boycott, and I sent my my son to school from the very first day, and for a long period of time rode the bus by himself.
I know who you are, and you're a sellout too, lady.
No. People have their right to
Yes, we wouldn't even bring them up. We fear for their safety.
They can send them. But for one lousy day, they couldn't have boycotted.
One day. One day. But they couldn't do that.
My kids are out, and they're not going.
It was very difficult for us. It was almost like getting up every morning and going to war. And many days I would come home and I would think about all the liberals that got on the buses and went south when for sit-ins and boycotts in the South. I really would come home and wonder, you know, where were they now?
The message was clear. Whites opposed to change in the school system were not going to back down. Most schools were calm, but some were battlegrounds.
When we started up the hill, you can hear people saying, "Niggas go home." There were signs. They had made up signs saying, "Black people stay out. We don't want any niggers in our school." And there were people on the corners holding bananas like we were apes.
As we went up the hill and approached the school, our students got very, very quiet. Where they had been just like any other kid riding a bus, making noise, laughing, talking, suddenly as they approached this place, they got very, very quiet. And then they would have to stay there till the police came over, escorted them out the bus and in through the metal detectors into the school. It was, I began for the first time to say, Ruth, maybe you shouldn't have gotten involved. Maybe you shouldn't have urged this desegregation. It killed me to see our black students go through that procedure.
It was pretty aggravating, actually, to go and be put all through this before you even started a day at school. You know, it's kind of ridiculous for a 17-year-old person to be treated this way.
On a normal day, there would be anywhere between 10 and 15 fights per day.
The white kids felt intimidated that they had black kids in the school. The black kids were intimidated because they were in this white school and they did not want to be pushed around.
You can walk down the corridor and a black person would bump into a white person or vice versa. That would be one fight, and they try to separate it because at that time it was so much tension in the school.
Just the slightest thing would set it off.
The NAACP surveyed black students on problems at South Boston High.
About a week later, I was sitting in my office one night, and I reached into my briefcase, and here were these forms. So I took them out, and I began sort of absently to read through them. As I read through one after another of these forms, what I saw was that these kids couldn't spell. They could not write a simple declaratory sentence. And as I read these forms, none of which were grammatically correct or spelling proper, I just started to cry. It was impossible to explain the feeling of pain on the one hand, but on the other hand, I knew we were right.
But the fight to correct years of miseducation was overshadowed by fear and violence. In October, a South Boston mob pulled a passing black motorist from his car. A policeman fired shots over the heads of the crowd and pulled the man to safety.
We don't teach our kids to hate anybody. All we want for our kids is to love and to get a decent education and to live decently as human beings. But we're not even distinguished as human beings as far as East Boston goes or South Boston. We're niggers. And I would be damned if I had any child of mine exposed to anything like that. I wouldn't want my child to sit beside it because, see, I'm not going to teach it to hate. And that's what's happening. That's the lesson that those kids have been getting out there in South Boston. Stand beside Mommy, sweetie, and throw a rock at the nigger.
For the first time, the mob violence in South Boston was echoed in Roxbury. Groups of black students roamed the streets, pelting white passersby with rocks.
I deplore the violence that I've read about and seen on television. I think that's most unfortunate.
Whites opposed to busing took heart from Gerald Ford's first press conference as president.
I have consistently opposed forced busing to achieve racial balance as a solution to quality education. And therefore, I respectfully disagree with the judge's order.
Boston was left on its own. The city's neighborhoods grew even more isolated and hostile.
But this city should have been open to everyone, and it wasn't. And it was that fear that if you stepped out of your place, you could be attacked. There was no leadership that said it's off limits.
I never heard any public official on the state level or on the city level come out and say, this is a good thing, we should all learn together, we should all live together. There was no encouragement from anybody. I call it complete official neglect.
South Boston, December 11th, 1974. A fight at the high school between a black and a white student got out of hand.
I remember the day Michael Faith got stabbed vividly because I was in the principal's office, and all of a sudden you heard a loud commotion and you heard kids screaming and yelling, saying, he's dead, that black nigga killed him, he's dead.
Oh, geez, we were close enough that we saw there was blood, on the hallway floor.
White students left. Rumors spread. South Boston residents and others surrounded the school. The black students were trapped inside.
Everybody but the police off the apron.
Louise Day Hicks appealed to the crowd.
I remember the police cars coming up the street, or attempting to, and turning over the police cars, and I was just amazed that they could do something like that. And the police tried to get horses up. They wouldn't let the horses get up. They stoned the horses, they stoned the cars. And I thought that day that we would never get out of South Boston High School.
Black community leaders and officials worked out a rescue plan. Volunteers rode decoy buses to the school.
Frankly, we were scared. But we went up, when we got closer to the school, we could hear the noise, and it's like a hollow feeling when you go up that hill.
Finally, it must have been 2:30 or 3 o'clock that afternoon. All of a sudden, all you heard was, you're going out the back door. You're going out the back door. At that moment, we had to run to the buses.
While the decoy buses distracted the mob at the front of the school, other buses pulled up to the back. The black students and leaders made it out of South Boston safely. Michael Faith did not die, but his stabbing and the ensuing riot further polarized the city. The school committee stiffened its resolve not to comply with the court order. In response, Judge Garrity placed 3 members in contempt of court.
It seems to me that Judge Garrity is going to bring us this plan with the boot of official authority and the uniform. In a certain sense, you can say that Reconstruction has finally come to the North with a vengeance.
In the face of school committee intransigence, the schools were run by the court. Judge Garrity's was the final word on curriculum, hiring and firing, and policy.
I mean, just time will change these people's minds, in your opinion?
No, I think, not necessarily. I think that time will bring about an understanding on the part of most people that there's no alternative but to compliance with the principles set out by the Supreme Court of the United States.
Over the next few years, resistance continued. In the first 2 years of desegregation, almost a third of the white students left the system.
Proclamation, race relation.
Over time, the court gradually forced changes in the Boston public schools, but the cost remained high.
What do you think is going to happen when you go to school?
When we go up there, we're going to be stoned. It's not fair to me, because why is the other way around when they come up here? When they come up here, we won't mess with them, so why when we come up there, they mess with us?
What do you think about the people of South Boston, Joanne? If you had a message you'd like to tell them, what would it be?
I don't think it's fair. It's not fair to me.
The greatest changes were not found in the schools. In 1977, Louise Day Hicks' political career ended in defeat. And for the first time in the 20th century, a black candidate won election to the Boston School Committee.
I felt that what took place absolutely had to happen. It may not have had to happen that way if there had been a different kind of leadership provided by white Bostonians of all classes and all neighborhoods. However, when you're the anvil, you bear, and when you're the hammer, you strike, and we were striking, and there was no turning back.